An awareness of God is common to all. We regard it as beyond dispute that there is in the mind of man, by natural inclination, a certain feeling for divinity, so that no one should seek refuge by claiming ignorance. The Lord has instilled in everyone some understanding of his majesty, so that all, having learned that there is one God and that he is their creator, should be condemned by their own testimony, because they have failed to honor him and to devote their lives to doing his will. To be sure, if we look for evidence that men have existed who were unaware of God and who had no knowledge of him, nothing could very likely be found, except perhaps among the most ignorant of peoples who are furthest removed from civilization and humanity. Yet, as even the heathen admit, there is no nation so barbarous, no race so wild, that it does not have a heartfelt impression that there is a God. And those who in other areas of their lives seem scarcely to differ from brute beasts nevertheless preserve some seed of religion, so rooted is this universal concept in every mind and so firmly fixed in every heart. Therefore, since from the beginning of the world no country, town, or even household has managed to do without religion, there we have a tacit admission that in the heart of every human being is stamped a feeling for divinity. Idolatry itself gives abundant proof of this idea. For we know how far man contrives to abase himself, however reluctantly, and how ready he is to honor other creatures in preference to himself. So because he would rather honor wood and stone than be reckoned to have no God at all, we can clearly see how strong is this perception of divine majesty. Man can less easily wipe it from his mind than he can deny his own natural inclinations. Deny them he does when he lays aside his haughty arrogance and willingly humbles himself before the vilest creatures on earth in order to pay God homage. That is why it is false to assert, as some do, that religion was forged in olden times by the craft and cunning of a few in order to keep common folk under control, even though those who urged others to honor God had no concept themselves of deity. Now I freely admit that some sly and scheming individuals among the heathen invented a good many things in religion, intimidating ordinary people and filling their minds with scruples so as to make them more obedient and docile. However, they would never have had their way if men were not already firmly persuaded that there was a God. This is the reason men were so ready to believe whatever they were told about him. Nor should we think that those who on the pretext of religion deceived the more ignorant were themselves quite devoid of the idea that God exists. For although in former times there were some, and today many, who deny the very notion of deity, they must continually sense, whether willingly or no, what they prefer not to know. We read of no one more brazen or frenzied in his contempt of God than the Roman Emperor Gaius Caligula. No one, however, ever trembled more wretchedly than he each time some mark of God's anger appeared. So despite himself, he had a dread of God whom he consciously sought to scorn. You will usually find that the same is true of others like him. The more outspoken a person is in his contempt of God, the more startled he will be by the sound of a leaf falling from a tree. Why is that? It is because God's majesty takes vengeance upon such people. The more they try to flee from it, the more he terrifies their conscience. They cast around for every hiding place imaginable where they may shelter from God's presence, and they try to drive from their minds every memory of it. But try as they may, they are trapped. And although sometimes the memory seems to vanish for a while, it inevitably returns to press them harder than before. The result is that if they feel some relief from the distress of conscience, it is little different from the sleep of drunkards or madmen, who even when asleep do not rest easy, since they are continually haunted by dreadful visions and dreams. Thus, the example of even the most wicked shows that the knowledge of God is an active and universal force in the hearts of all men.